you showed in drawing together so many moving parts of modern society, the structure of the industrial economy, the regulations on the labor market, the demographic forces in the background. It's a much richer picture than we're used to getting from scholars, let alone ministers. And it's very impressive, to me at least, that in the midst of that much sophistication, you still have an active agenda. You don't get paralyzed by the sense that there are too many moving parts. And I think you're to be commended for that. If I could, before I open it up to general discussion, if I could just follow up on a couple questions. Despite what I just said, in best Washington style, I'm going to be a little bit more reductionist and pointed. So one is, you made some interesting comparisons across Europe. The scatter plots on country birth, on companies' birth are very important, the demographics. One thing that stands out, of course, though, is that Italy has very much underperformed as an exporter for a long time now. There are people in Germany who perhaps unfairly would say you haven't done well at exporting since the last time the lira devalued against the Deutschmark, or such. So I guess a question to ask you is, when you have those charts of unit labor costs, where do you think Italy's comparative advantage comes going forward? And to make it a little more pointed, one thing which many people in this country have only modest familiarity with Italy, the Italian economy, are aware of, is the north-south divide. We're very conscious of the fact there are some global exporters and some leading companies up in the Turin, Milan, all those kinds of places, but we don't see that in southern Italy. You perhaps consciously didn't stress the distinctions across Italy. How do you see that going forward, the convergence across Italy in this kind of context?
Well, on the first question, let me just underline that in this period of, as you said, low performance compared to Germany, okay? Because in absolute terms, the exports increased, but of course, the share of Italy declined as usual with globalization. We shouldn't forget that at the same time, Italy has developed a huge number of multinational units around the world, which created 1.5 million employees outside Italy. So I would say that a lot of productions that were produced within Italy before now are produced, of course, in other markets. So the Italian enterprises and Italian entrepreneurs are doing well. Those, of course, who are open to the international competition. It's quite clear, looking at the micro data, that other things equal, the fact that you are an exporter makes you much more efficient, much more productive, and you increase employment, and so on and so forth. This is why one of the big challenges we are facing is to expand the number of enterprises who are exposed to the international competition. But on the other hand, as I said, a lot of multinationals were able to enter into new markets. So we should look really at the sum of the two elements. And unfortunately, we do not have statistics. But it's clear that the German multinationals had a longer, I would say, history in being present, especially in Asia, than the Italian multinationals. So this has to be taken into account. On the other hand, it's clear that as in the years 2000, the so-called euro dividend, which means very low interest rates, were not used by companies in order to invest in new technologies, in more efficient production processes, and so on and so forth. And of course, then there is the labor cost problem, which of course has the two components. One is the net salary, which are very low in Italy, and the other one is the unit labor cost, which is very high because of tax wedge and other taxes. So this is the challenge that we are facing, and in the next budget law, in 2 weeks' time, we should be able to try to cut the tax wedge, as we hope. The North-South divide it's funny because a few years ago at the university I faced a discussion of a thesis of a young student who was talking about the Italian railway system. And he presented 500 pages thesis. And the professor said, well, you should be a little bit shorter, and can you explain to the Commission what is the main problem of Italian railway system? And this guy said, yes, of course. Well, the problem is that Italy is like this, it's long and short, and of course has mountain in the middle. Therefore, the entire railway system was north-south and not east-west, which of course is a serious problem for a country like Italy. It's just to say that, of course, Italy is a long country with a lot of problems in the south, and it's true that notwithstanding the big investments made and big efforts made in terms of security, in terms of infrastructures, the south is still lagging behind. And the crisis has killed some emerging companies, for example, in textile and other, let's say, made in Italy productions that were emerging also in the south. We have facing problems with the development of tourism because of some internal regulations that have blocked some of the big investments. But I would say that now we have a great opportunity with a new round of structural funds. It's about 90 billion euros for the next 7 years that will go mainly to the south, but not only. And we have just taken measures in order to avoid that this money go around to regions without a strong control, accountability, and policy coherence of these new investments. So I really hope that with the work done with this government in these 4 months, this new round will be able to use money in a much more efficient way.
Thank you, Mr. Minister. 1 second. Just to point out, as I learned from Fred, we must claim credit where we do. The Institute, with the European Commission support, put out a volume in 2005 in which we were already flagging the fact that the Euro bonus was not translating into private investment, both not just in Italy but elsewhere, and unfortunately that continued. A lot of other things I could ask, but we have a lot of interest. I'd like, as usual, to ask our first couple questions to come from people outside the Institute. So the gentleman there and then there. When you get the mic, please identify yourself.
Thank you. I'm Gonzalo Garcia from the Embassy of Spain. Thank you, Minister. I noticed in one of your charts that in those companies where the workers were consulted, they tended to be a high probability of being high performers. Some people say that one of the hidden kind of German strengths, real German strengths of the German model is the way that companies are consult workers and workers participate in the management of the companies. Have you given thoughts in the government strategy about that, how to promote that kind of, because I think in all there are two issues here, which one, of course, is all the social policies and institutions, but one very important thing is what happens in companies themselves. Have you given thoughts about that and how to increase that percentage? Thank you.
Do you want to respond?
Okay. Yes. In the previous law for the labor market reform, there was a delegation to the government to implement measures exactly to foster the participation of workers. Unfortunately, this delegation was not used, and we are planning to relaunch it in the next few weeks. Of course, the problem is also a fiscal problem, because you have to create incentives, like in other countries, so it has a cost. But my plan is to include this in the package that will be presented with the next budget law. Beside that, I was quite interested by a book written by Richard Sennett, who talked about the models for making innovation within companies. And quoting some important American companies, without naming them, where innovation in the first step is done building different teams who compete to each other, and of course the most innovative gets a bonus and so on. Well, looking at this game from a game theory perspective, you can see all the risks of this highly competitive model, because in the first shot everybody does its best, but then in the second shot you may be working in a working team with other people who were your opponents before, your competitors. So you learn that sharing information with those who in the third step will be competitors is not necessarily the best way to go. So, but I know that there are some businessmen here that the cooperative approach to innovation can be better than the purely competitive one. In this case, this could explain, for example, some of those results, because when you harness the collective intelligence of a company, you may have better results than just when you have one manager with a clear vision, but not talking to anyone.
To sound like an American right-winger for a second, let's remember that American productivity has outpaced European and has none of this stuff. The gentleman there. The mic is coming to you, sir.
Richard Gardner, Columbia University. Thank you, Enrico, for a courageous and very informative presentation, and congratulations on the labor market reforms. That's very impressive. Recently, this institute, the Peterson Institute, issued a very important document entitled Resolving the European Debt Crisis. It reminds us that Italy's public debt as a share of GDP is the highest in Europe except for Greece, well over 100%. It says also the following, and I'd like you to comment on this. Quote, social discontent and disaffection with the entire political system are mounting. In recent years, Italy has acquired the dubious distinction of topping the European League in inequality of wealth and income distribution. Most Italians instinctively know that the situation is not politically sustainable. Contempt for the perceived privileges of the political class, for widespread corruption, and for the high level of tax evasion is universal. These are not my words, these are the words of the distinguished authors of the Peterson Institute. So would you like to comment on some of these other problems that are facing Italy today?
Well, thank you very much for the question, of course. Well, I can tell you a couple of things, also based on these 5 months of experience. As I said, as you know, I'm not a politician. I'm just trying to serve my country in this position. And of course, my wife is very upset and sad when she reading some comments on blogs. She read the discussion on whether it was better if I died by the end of the week or by the end of the day. This was what people were talking about on a blog. Then I asked myself, why? Did I make terrible things vis-a-vis social, let's say, problems? We put 4 billion euros in 4 months to sustain people who lost the jobs, in subsidies for new people, new recruitments, young people. So in a sense, we didn't take any negative measures, but on the contrary. But this doesn't matter if someone is discussing about the death of a minister. So the point that you mentioned is exactly the core point of a country that does not trust the people in charge. How can you react to that? Either you cut completely the old political class and make a revolution. Or, and I think this is what we are trying to do, you nominate as ministers. Most people never had a responsibility in the government before. We're the youngest government in the Italian history, the government with the largest women participation, with a very young prime minister, and then you start working. This is what we are trying to do, what we are doing, actually. But this requires time. So, of course, you read newspapers about the political instabilities in Italy and so on, and we are suffering of it. But on the other hand, I can tell you that all ministers are working very hard. In some cases, including myself, we accepted to cut our wages quite severely, but this is not enough. You see what I mean? Is a situation in which you need time to show improvements, to show your commitment and the concrete results, and this requires time. But on the other hand, let me just add one point that is, in my view, quite interesting. For too many years, Italy was very close to the boom, to collapse. And therefore, Italy needed the so-called rescue packages, the Salva Italia, the laws that was cutting the deficit, and so on and so forth. Now that we are in a more or less unstable, financially speaking, situation, we are going back to a normal mode. In a normal mode, governments do not do rescue packages every single week. But the public opinion is waiting for the big bang. So all the measures that we have made over the last 4 months, and we put together into the update of the economic and financial document, which is the basis of the planning, when people read it, said, really? You did that? Oh, we didn't notice it. Because Italy is poisoned, I would say, of this culture of the Big Bang. So, as you can see, it's not easy. But unless we improve people's life, we will never demonstrate that we are useful, that we are working well. And this is why I think Europe support is so important, and the role of international institutions who, of course, have to underline deficiencies and problems, but also recognize the positive steps is so important in this particular moment.
Fantastic. I encourage people who want to speak to make themselves known. I'll get you in order, or to go to the back microphone. We have there a different distinguished Peterson Institute scholar, Jacob Kierkegaard, who heads our work on labor and pensions anyway. Jacob.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Minister, and thank you for a very interesting presentation. Two questions. One thing, I was very encouraged by your focus on high labor costs. That in fact, in the policies to come, you mentioned a large reduction in the tax wage in Italy. I would strongly be in support of that. But I guess my slightly skeptical question is that Italy has a deficit target that it has to adhere to, and I think it's fair to say that it has proven difficult in recent months to tax other things than labor in Italy. It was hard to tax real estate. Raising the VAT is also not seemingly that straightforward. So where are you going to shift the tax burden under the assumption that Italy actually can't just cut it to achieve a major reduction in the tax wedge? That's the first question. And the second question regarding also the labor markets, I mean, it seems to me that you sort of evaded what I would regard as the elephant in the room in Italy, which is, compared to the rest of Europe, even your neighboring countries, is the remarkable low female labor force participation. You mentioned, sort of en passant that, yes, you're going to do something about, work-life balance for women, but it seems to me that Italy needs to do a lot more to achieve a result of that. And if you actually succeeded, you should be able to counter, at least for a period of time, the main impacts of aging. So what are you going to do on female labor force participation? And then finally, I can't resist noting, as a country coming originally from a country that recently had the EU presidency, that I hope your commitment to Italian leadership during the coming Italian presidency translates into no elections during the presidency, and indeed political stability during that period. Thank you.
It'd also be nice if he could bring good weather, but not everything is under the minister's control. But I do want to emphasize that there's a lot of interest in our audience on the female labor force participation issue. We've had a lot of discussion here about Japan, which obviously demographically is similar and has a similar low state of female labor force participation. It's perhaps starting to address that. So we'd be very interested in your remarks on that. Thank you, Jacob.
Well, quickly, you're right. We face big difficulties in cutting the budget. Oh, by the way, when a new administration arrives, in January, typically, of a certain year,
Yep.
right? Does it make, I would say, a mid-year big financial action, or does it wait until the next budget cycle in order to make its own?
Depends on the country, but in the U.S., the two go together. But we're weird. We don't have a parliament, so don't compare.
What I mean,
Yeah, well, that's
what
why.
I want to stress here, that for the first time since I don't know when, a new government, as a first action, didn't take dramatic measures in order to change the budget perspectives that the previous government had done. And this is not trivial, because over the last 4 months, we had to work within the boundaries that were decided by the previous government. And we decided not to do the usual mid-year new fiscal consolidation, because we wanted to take some time in order to evaluate correctly the different options. One word on the real estate tax and so on. It's true that we have decided to cancel the real estate, the tax on property on the first house. This tax was introduced in 2011, was introduced by the Monti's government in a way that I think should be mentioned by all textbooks of public finance as a very bad way to go. Because it was introduced in March, and Italians understood around December how much we had to pay. Because for months, we didn't know what this tax could be. What I mean is that from a psychological point of view, that tax was considered one of the worst mistakes by a technical government, by the Monti's government. On the other hand, all parties in their campaigns have indicated the need to reform it in different ways. What we have decided to do is a service tax, which is, I would argue, a very modern tax. Let me just elaborate in 30 seconds.
Yeah, please.
If I
No, we have time. It's just there's so many people want to ask.
No,
So.
but this is an important point. You may know Jeff Mulgan, Jeff Morgan was one of the advisors to Tony Blair and the Gold Age, if you wish. In a discussion we had some time ago, he said, well, in the 19th century, being a big country meant to have a large land. And the tax system was charging land. In the 20th century, being a big country has meant to have a big GDP, to produce and consume a lot. And in fact, our tax system is coherent. What does it mean to be a big country in the 21st century? Maybe to offer a high quality of life. In a globalized world, it's very difficult to control where you make money. But if you come to my country using my land, my water, my fresh air, and so on and so forth, you have to pay. The service tax is exactly this, with a strong property component, but also with a component about the services that you enjoy. So in a sense, this tax, at least in my view, is a positive evolution versus towards something better. Now, in year 2014, the current forecasts tell us that we should have a deficit GDP ratio ongoing 2.5%. So in theory, of course, we have the structural zero budget, but in nominal terms, we would have something like 0.4% of GDP freedom, beside the freedom given to us by the fact that we are below 3%. So I wouldn't say that we do not have margins of maneuver, but of course we have to use them very carefully. And this is why we took our time, instead of having another financial cut at the midst of the year. We took some time, and October is the right moment to do that. And you are right on female employment rate, but this is linked to the way in which our family welfare is organized, because the services for old people, kids, and so on are very low quality, and therefore a lot of women had to take care of their relatives. So it's a sort of vicious circle that cannot really change unless you have better systems for work and life balance.
All right. Gentleman over there, and then Anders at the back.
My name is Peterson. I'm the founder of Capital Intel Group. My question to the minister is, I've set up 3 successful international groups based out of Milan over the last 2 decades. And the real good news is this is the first time in 2 decades that I see really good economic opportunities arising and growing out of the Milan area, especially with the Expo 2015. The question I have to you is, for foreign investors, the Italian bureaucracy is a nightmare. The only way you're successful in Italy is by not having any dealings with the government at all. The more you can keep away from the government, the more successful you are. And American business owners, do not understand that. So you have Partita IVA, you have Lavoro in Nero, you have all this, which is great. It makes Italy very competitive. But for international groups, that is impossible to do. Getting a fisco and a Partita IVA, you'll have the Italian tax police on you for 10 years, even when you close the business. So how are you going to be able to do that as the Italian government, especially with 215? We only have 2 years. So this is a real emergency crisis now. And you have the Russians, you have the Chinese, you have the Qataris. They're flooding Milan at this point. So there's a huge amount of economic growth and even M&A transaction. You have Apex, you have all the private equity and all the banks. So, you have everything there, even for North Africa and the rest of the Mediterranean. Thank you, sir.
You're absolutely right. This is why you may know that I was one of the 10 wise men that the president of Italy established, called before the new government, in order to build a sort of possible government program. And I stress a lot this opportunity of Expo 2015 as a huge opportunity to change, to innovate, to test new ideas. This is why I'm discussing with enterprises and trade unions in particular for creating a new labor arrangement, especially for the Expo 2015. But what you said in terms of bureaucracy is one of the key problems. The problem is that to address that, you need to change the constitution. And this is what we are doing. Because in year 2001, the new constitution was adopted with much more power at local level. And we cannot, from a government, enter anymore in some of these arrangements. This is why the first act of this government was to propose to the parliament to reform the constitution, and this with, through an accelerated process, in order to have in 1 year several changes, not only to the fact that, on the fact that we will have only one chamber that will make legislation and not the other one. So we want to change quite dramatically our constitution, but especially because the different governance structure, multi-level, doesn't work at all. But in some cases we are blocked because from the center we cannot enter into the autonomy of regions. So in the Destination Italy project, there are a lot of actions that we want to undertake in the next few months, at least to improve the situation from a perspective of an international investor. We have worked with our experts, with experts from Confindustria and other business associations in order to address the main concerns that international investors have now. But let me also add that maybe we have to inform you better about the changes that are happening. For example, with the employment package that we passed in June, a lot of opportunities, more opportunities for investors now are available. And we have to help you in understanding all these changes.
Very good. We have Anders at the back mic and then Fred in front.
My name is Anders Åslund. I'm here from the Peterson Institute. Thank you, Minister Giovannini, for a very substantial presentation, and I very much appreciated your final focus on human and social capital. But in that context, I found it all the more puzzling that you did not mention education itself. I understand it's not your portfolio, but Italy really stands out. According to the Eurostat, among the 28 EU countries, it is the country with the third smallest number of second school graduates. And if you don't have education, all the rest is really not so important. How can you explain that you omitted this point? Thank you.
You're absolutely right. I didn't mention it only because I focused on other topics, but of course that is one of the key points, and I'm very pleased that this government, for the first time since, again, I don't know when, we put money on education, while in the past the budget was cut year after year. For example, we put back money into the fund for allowing poor students to follow universities and others, of course, if they have the quality to do that. This was almost close to zero. It was put to zero by the previous government. It's just to say that, of course, a lot of things have to be done. One of the innovations that I'm really working on is the capacity of our schools, also at intermediate level, so for kids of 11, 12, before they make the choice for the high school, to be informed about the evolution of the labor market in their province and the neighbor provinces at European level, national level, in order to make the decision to choose the high school, knowing what will be the perspectives in the labor market. This is a small example to say that I really believe that we have to start as soon as possible in order to share this information with people in order to allow them to make better choices. Just one remark on the training, public training, which is managed by regions, not by the state. And of course, this is a problem, but we are working with them and with provinces under the program Youth Guarantee, exactly in order to try to bring together the best practices, because a lot of money has been wasted in the past with training courses that were not really helping people to find new jobs. The other problem we have is that we have a lot of small enterprises who are not investing in training for their own employees. I skipped one of the charts which tell us that finally in 2010 more than 55% of enterprises with more than 10 employees are doing training for their people. In 2005 was only 30%. So you can see that the problem of investing in human capital is not only from the public side, but also from the private side.
Very good. Fred?
Fred Bergston from the Peterson Institute. You mentioned, Mr. Minister, the rather dramatic reform of your pension system, raising the retirement age to 67. But you said it was not a good time to do it. It was in a recession and there were lots of side effects. But would you have ever gotten the reform if it were not for the recession and the crisis? I mean, that's the policy dilemma. People never act unless they're forced to act, and then you get side effects. But is that correct in your case? Does one just have to accept that you do get adverse side effects for a while to get a good long-term reform and put in place?
Yes, of course, you're right. Most of the reforms have a J-curve effect, and when you do these reforms in a recession, it's worse than when you do them in an expansion. This is the scene that Italy had for many years. So I'm not blaming those who made reforms. It's just to explain that the worsening of the labor market was also due to this particular decision, and also the reform of the labor market again took place in June 2012 in the midst of the recession. But now we have tools to better address the future. This is why I really believe that the first signals of a recovery that we can observe in terms of confidence increase, in terms of increase of orders, the construction sector finally in the second quarter of 2012 picked up for the first time after several months of dramatic loss, and the hours worked increased as well. So there are signs now of a recovery, and of course we hope to be able to benefit from those reforms in order to have a higher productivity and higher growth in future. One remark that I made today at the IMF is that our welfare systems have been designed for the classical I would say, capitalistic crisis, strong but short. But now we are facing 5 years of crisis, which is a completely different story. And maybe in future we will have other crises. So we must build resilient economies and societies in order to face this kind of risks. But once you have been hit so hard by a crisis like that, being scared is the normal way of reacting. So building resilience requires, as I said before, the demonstration that the reforms may have impact, positive impact. Otherwise, people will stay scared and will never accept to change anything. So this is the proof that Italy now has to demonstrate.
Well, let me close it there. I think your response in particular to Ambassador Gardner was quite impressive as a statement of the commitment of yourself personally and of your government and of your poor long-suffering wife to the recovery of Italy. And as I said at the start, we are very proud to have been associated with, engaged with, in discussion with a succession of your technocratic colleagues who've done their best for Italy, and we're delighted that you were here today to continue that tradition. We wish you the best of success.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much.